2003, one tiny European country put a single question to a vote. How much power can you actually trust one man with? And this man was not even an elected politician. He owned the bank that held a significant part of the country's wealth. And technically, he owned the country itself. Before the referendum, he made his intentions clear. Vote against me, he said, and I will simply move to Vienna. 64% voted to give him even more power. Nobody wanted to take those powers away. He can now dissolve the government at any moment. He appoints judges. He can veto any law. And in an emergency, he can rule by decree. And the strangest part, this happened in the 21st century, right in the middle of Europe. The country is called Liechtenstein. Only 39,000 people live here, roughly what fit inside one football stadium. You can drive across the entire country in about 20 minutes, and most people could not point to it on a map. The ruling family's fortune is estimated at around $10 billion. Their private bank manages nearly $300 billion. But first, what kind of place is this actually? In 1868, Liechtenstein disbanded its army entirely. The official reason was surprisingly simple. It was just too expensive. And surprisingly, this has caused almost no problems. In 2007, Switzerland accidentally invaded Liechtenstein. 170 Swiss soldiers were running a night exercise and walked about 1.5 kilometers across the border without noticing. The funniest part, nobody in Liechtenstein even noticed. The next morning, the Swiss had to call and apologize themselves. Liechtenstein calmly accepted. That was the end of it. They produce roughly 1 out of every 5 sets of dentures on Earth. A company in Ashan turns out about 60 million sets a year. Somewhere in the world right now, someone is probably chewing with a smile thanks to Liechtenstein. And in 2011, you could rent the entire country. One night cost $70,000. The price included accommodation for 150 guests. Street signs were temporarily swapped for yours. You even received a symbolic key to the state, plus your own currency printed specially for your visit, and a wine tasting with the prince himself. Even Snoop Dogg tried to rent the country for a music video. As far as anyone knows, nobody ever took the offer. The money here is arranged far more interestingly. And surprisingly, buying the land had nothing to do with actually living there. They simply needed a seat in the imperial diet. The funny part? After buying it, they didn't even visit for more than 100 years. Then the family made one decision that changed everything. In 1930, they took control of a small local bank. Over time, that bank became LGT Group, and the family still owns it completely. No outside shareholders, no pressure from the stock market. Today, the bank manages around $300 billion. Over time, Liechtenstein built its tax system around exactly this money. Corporate taxes stayed low, and banking secrecy stayed almost untouchable. By the 90s, there were more registered companies here than residents. Tens of thousands of companies existed only on paper. And at the center of this system sat the ruling family. Their bank controlled the money. Their government wrote the rules. Is too much power concentrated in one pair of hands? In 2003, that exact question went to a vote. Prince Hans Adam II came to power in 1989. In his opinion, a country should operate much like a successful company. And citizens, in that model, were basically customers of the state. Throughout the 90s, the prince and parliament argued constantly. They wanted the right to appoint judges and block legislation. Parliament believed the monarch should stay mostly ceremonial. Neither side was willing to give in. So in 2002, the prince went directly to the citizens. If people vote against this, he said, I will move to Vienna. And he wasn't bluffing. But the point was never really about relocating. His family financed a noticeable share of the country's life. If the prince actually left, much of that money would leave with him. The Council of Europe criticized the initiative openly. The prince answered without hesitating. If necessary, Liechtenstein would simply leave the Council of Europe. The vote took place on the 14th of March, 2003. 64% said yes, and the prince got everything he asked for. He can now dismiss the elected government without any explanation. He appoints judges from a list he helps assemble himself. He can issue a veto that parliament is unable to overturn, and in an emergency, dissolve parliament and govern by decree. Formally, residents can still abolish the monarchy through a referendum. They tried testing that in practice in 2012. The answer was clear. 76% voted to leave the prince his veto. Income per person here remains among the highest in the world. Unemployment sits at practically zero. For most residents, the deal seemed pretty simple. A high standard of living in exchange for a very unusual constitution. But 5 years later, the system faced a problem nobody saw coming. This problem had a name, a job, and access to everything. Heinrich Kieber worked in data management at LGT. His job was converting the bank's client archives into digital form, which meant he had access to thousands of private accounts. And one day, he decided to copy a substantial part of it. He left Liechtenstein, taking the database with him. Germany's intelligence agency decided the information was worth buying. The deal cost roughly 4,200,000 euros. The disk held data on about 1,000 clients. On the 14th of February 2008, investigators arrived at one house. Its owner was Klaus Zumwinkel, head of Deutsche Post. When he stepped outside, journalists were already waiting at the door. He resigned the same day. A court later convicted him of evading roughly 1 million euros in tax. More than 160 other people came under suspicion. Germany turned out to be only the first country to buy the data. Kieber later sold it to Britain and France. Then the United States, Canada, Australia, and Italy showed interest. And most of that process was set off by one man with one hard drive. Kieber then received a new identity and disappeared. But the ending of this story turned out nothing like people expected. Many believed that once banking secrecy disappeared, the entire model would collapse. The money was supposed to leave. The opposite happened. Today, LGT manages even larger sums than before the scandal. The clients who only wanted secrecy simply moved to other countries. The ones who wanted stability and professionalism stayed. It turned out banking secrecy was never the real product. The real product was the system itself. It decides quickly because it has one main center of power. It thinks in decades because that power does not change every election. And the strangest part? The prince's interests actually match the country's. A man who owns the bank wants the country rich and stable. They were not simply choosing between democracy and money. They were deciding whether to change a system that already delivered. And they decided not to fix what wasn't broken. Whether that was a good decision depends on how you view democracy. 39,000 people made their choice and they still live with it. The prince that still has his bank and his veto. Sean still produces enormous quantities of dentures for the world. The Swiss army has not wandered in accidentally since. And nobody has managed to rent an entire country either. On most maps, Liechtenstein still barely has room for its name. Perhaps somewhere near you, there is a state running on similar principles. It simply will never tell you about it. And its residents twice had the chance to change everything. Twice, they decided to leave everything exactly the way it was. And that might be the strangest part of the entire story.